AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Geetu Ambwani. Geetu is Senior Director of Data Insights at Flatiron Health. Geetu, welcome to the show.
Hey, JP, great to be here.
Our pleasure. Geetu, let's start with a little bit of background of yourself, how you first got involved in technology, some of the roles you've held along the way, taking us up to your current position at Flatiron.
Sure. So I did my undergraduate degree in India in electrical engineering. And while I was doing my summer research internship, I became really interested in the intersection of computer science and language and signal processing. So areas like natural language processing, automatic speech recognition. And so this led to me applying for graduate school to a university in the US, Johns Hopkins, actually in Baltimore, which had a pretty famous lab that was called the Center for Language and Speech Processing, which is where I ended up doing my graduate research work. Post my master's, I joined a startup in Pittsburgh that had grown out of the Carnegie Mellon Speech Lab. And I was, I think, employee number 15. And we were basically doing, introducing speech recognition to healthcare transcription. And the company essentially grew a ton, and today it's one of the largest AI-based clinical documentation companies. It was really exciting. It was in Pittsburgh, and after I did my 4-year stint, I had started becoming interested in a different problem space, specifically the media space, and I was really interested in how journalism was changing with the introduction of social media, how we were consuming news and information differently. And so I moved to DC and I joined another startup that was working on audio and video search. Soon after that, there was an opportunity that arose at the Washington Post, where we were, essentially there was a skunk work lab that we were setting up that was tasked with this very exciting mission of figuring out what the future of news could look like. And so that's effectively what we did. We built out the team that I was working with. We built out a personalized news engine, which could power a variety of these social reading apps, which was a big deal back then when Facebook and Twitter were very, very, really changing the way that people were consuming news back in the day. And so that was really fun. I think we were also part of, at one point, we had an app that was essentially the fastest growing social reading app in that time. So that was really exciting. And we then, after about 2.5 years there, I started to get the itch to apply what I had learned in the context of a real newsroom. The Washington Post Labs, which was great, it was a great experience, but it was more like an external innovation lab. And I wanted to see how this sort of impacted a regular newsroom. And so I was approached by the Huffington Post in New York, where they were building out this machine learning data science team from the ground up. And so that's when I moved to New York, and we built out this team that was really integrated into the newsroom. And we worked very closely on lots of different products and analytical type work, some of which was around understanding, what kind of content did well with what kinds of audiences. We started building algorithms that could predict when an article could go viral, and also figure out how to optimize the distribution over various social media platforms. So around that point, I had hit about a decade or so in the media space. I also had my son in 2017, so I was taking some time off in my personal life. I was on maternity leave, and I was thinking through my next move. And I wanted to do, I really liked the space of media because it was very mission oriented. And that's basically what I was looking for in my next role. And I decided that I would go back to healthcare. And that's essentially how I found my way back to Flatiron Health, where I am now a senior director on the data insights team here.
Excellent. Thank you, Geetu, for that really interesting journey thus far, having spent quite a bit of time building up expertise in media to then make an industry change into now the healthcare space. So obviously we want to learn a bit more about your function and your role as one of the leaders of the Data Insights Group. But can you first give a very brief overview to anyone not familiar? Who are Flatiron Health and what are you guys doing?
Flatiron Health is a technology company in the healthcare space. We own and operate the largest electronic healthcare record system that's used by a majority of the community oncology clinics in the United States. What we do is we collect all of this clinical data that's generated across our network, and we combine it with data from a few academic institutions. We normalize it, harmonize it, and we turn all this data into a research grade data set, which can be used for life science companies for clinical insight and accelerating care in cancer research effectively. And so these kinds of data sets are really valuable when it comes to thinking about learning patterns of how patient care is conducted, health outcomes analysis, how to inform clinical trial and enrollment. And this is sort of this new field of medicine called real world research, real world evidence generation, essentially.
Thank you, Geetu. So we can talk about some of the examples in a little bit, but I'd first like to understand what's involved as being one of the directors of the Data Insights team. Can you give me some details of the team structure, the projects, and then we can talk about some of the impact you guys are having for the industry?
Yeah, definitely. So the Data Insights team at Flatiron is effectively the product data science function. We operate as in a fully embedded fashion as opposed to a centralized data science team. So effectively, if you're a data scientist on my team, you would work within the context of a product team with other cross-functional team members. That could be software engineers, oncologists, nurse practitioners, and biostatisticians. And our business is sort of split into these two sides, as I was talking about earlier. We have the provider side, which is effectively the side that works with the EHR and makes that EHR, really useful for all of our clinicians. And then there's the research side of our business, which is the part where we are effectively creating these data sets that can be used for cancer research. And so the Data Insights team is kind of set up across both of these sides, and my teams work on the research side primarily. So talking about my role, as you can imagine, our team and organization, just Flatiron in general, as well as the team, has grown significantly in the last few years. And I think we've doubled consistently every year for the last 4 years. So last year so my role has evolved just as the team has grown and the organization has grown. So last year I was playing much more of a functional leadership role where I led all of the data science team on the research business line. And most of my time was spent on thinking of, ways to scale up the team because we were hiring more people. So how best to onboard them? What should our recruiting processes look like? What does career development look like at scale? One of the big projects that I spent my time on was creating, a career ladder for data science. And if you think about data science as opposed to software engineering, it's a fairly new field. So there isn't like a standard thing that you can just like really pick from. So we really had to create this charter and mandate, which was very custom for where Flatiron is in its, where Flatiron and the team is and how we could create the most impact within that context. So this year, I'm shifting my focus to be less functional in nature and much more strategic and product focused. So on the research side of our business, our biggest revenue generator is effectively our recurring cancer disease registries. These are these core cancer data sets that we deliver on a monthly cadence. And our goal this year is to reimagine what the next generation of this product line will look like. So I work with a bunch of other cross-functional leads to, really redesign what that new product could look like. And the reason we are trying to do that is because we want to increase the clinical depth of these data sets such that we can enable them to answer more and more advanced types of research questions, such that we can truly accelerate cancer research.
So what I'd love to do is talk about some of the use cases and examples, because for people familiar with healthcare data, it will make a lot of sense and people will understand the access. But for anyone interested in data or working in technology who are not quite aware of some of the previous barriers to data access, could you give us some insight into the sort of the before and after, before services like Flatiron existed, and how big an impact it's having both for patient treatment and research and everything else that comes along with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you think about how clinical evidence generation is done in the field of medicine today, it's primarily always been done by using clinical trials. And clinical trials are effectively these, randomized A/B tests for the data science audience, but you're doing this on, human subjects, and it's incredibly costly. It takes many, many years to accrue patients to a trial and sort of watch how that, treatment cycle or that cycle continues effectively. And then taking a step back, if you look at, especially in oncology, less than 5% of adult patients with cancer will actually participate in these trials. And then the people who do have access and participate in a clinical trial are generally younger, healthier, and the population is generally less diverse than the true real world cancer affected population. So the core animating idea behind Flatiron is that there is a lot of patient data that is generated during routine care. So if you are an oncology patient today, you go into your clinic, we gather a lot of data about what therapy you're on, how you're responding to the therapy, and etc. And that data is sort of just sits in these siloed systems, different electronic healthcare systems. There's claims data, there's all kinds of sources of data, but we don't really leverage that when we are drawing conclusions about, which therapy can be more effective for a certain cohort of cancer patients. So there's just a lot of insight to be found within this data. And so, and that's what I mean by real world evidence, which is the term I had used before. So the idea is, how can we take this information that's generated during routine cancer care, right, cancer patient care, and how can we supplement the evidence in a clinical trial with the evidence of patients treated in the real world? And how can we help accelerate the science effectively sooner than it would be normally done? So the best way is probably to illustrate with an example of a project that Flatiron Health was involved in. So effectively, there's a cancer drug that's very successful that's used for certain indications of breast cancer, which was approved by the FDA in 2015. It's a drug called Ibrance, which is from the pharma company called Pfizer. And this drug has been, pretty successfully used for breast cancer patients. And it turns out that there are also certain, even though breast cancer obviously commonly affects women, we also see incidences of breast cancer in men. But obviously when the initial trial for Ibrance was conducted, the population was primarily women. And so the FDA had not approved the use of this drug in the male breast cancer population. And in order to expand the indication or expand the drug label for use in males, you would have to essentially commission a trial, find these patients, and spend 10 years watching their progress and then drawing the conclusion. So, but given that this drug is actually already used, is already prescribed by a lot of doctors in the field, we were able to sort of look in our data set across this 2 million cancer data set that we have and find these patients who were already being treated for this drug. And we were able to create this data set that was used as supplementary evidence by the FDA. And the FDA could see that this drug was still effective in this sort of newer population, and they approved this drug, which meant that this drug now gets to a lot of, is being used by a lot of male breast cancer patients immediately, effectively a decade or so sooner than they would have got it. And they also get reimbursed for it by the insurance companies. So it sort of has been truly impactful. If you think about it, it's impactful both from the patient care perspective, but also from the science perspective, that we are using our resources effectively, and we're really drawing from all of the knowledge and all of the data that exists if you look across an entire population.
That's amazing. So if you think of the impact, not just the time in which to get a potentially life-saving drug to market, you've turned it from what could have been 8 to 10 years to 6 to 8 months. And the savings also in the millions of dollar range. That's incredible. I want to just go back to something you said a little earlier, where you talked about building the career ladder, because I think you guys have figured out a system to grow aggressively, but also maintain a great reputation and really high employee engagement. I'm sure a big part of that is the thought and effort you guys have put into things like the career ladder. So I'd love to get a bit better understanding of what it's like to work in the data team at Flatiron, what you guys have been able to accomplish, what's exciting about it, some of the interesting problems you're solving, and how you've been able to maintain such high growth, but also such high engagement with the workforce.
Yeah, great question. We've spent a lot of time thinking about this, especially in the last year when we were scaling up quite a bit. So I think there's two aspects to it. One was really embedding this culture of mentorship, and one of our very core Flatiron values is learn, teach, and grow. And I think that's very is very inculcated into the culture of Flatiron as well as the team itself, where every senior data scientist takes very seriously the responsibility of paying it forward and teaching, and really taking an interest in teaching a more junior data scientist how to be more effective, not just from a technical standpoint, but also really helping them understand the business space we are in, the product that we are trying to build, and really thinking about being an effective data scientist in a very sort of holistic fashion. How do you communicate? How do you communicate the value of your work to stakeholders is a huge part of it. In addition to just, obviously all of the technical growth that happens naturally when you are part of a data science team. So I think the mentorship aspect is one big piece. And then the other big piece that we spent a lot of time on was really spending time with both within the team as well as outside the team with our stakeholders, trying to define what the charter of the team was going to be and where we were going to focus to have the most impact. And so we think of where data scientists at Flatiron can be most impactful as split into two categories. One is we spend a lot of our time doing data-driven product discovery. So as we are a startup, we're sort of often innovating and enhancing a product or building a new product from scratch. And so we lay a lot of premium in sort of the skill of being able to iteratively prototype quickly something. So that's like a skill set that we obviously grow through mentorship, but that's also like very much part of the charter and the intention of the organization. And then the other place where we focus our efforts day to day is data-driven decision analytics. So ensuring that our business decisions are being informed, very much informed by the use of customer and operational data. So for example, when we are trying to set up KPIs for a team, when how can we introduce these data-driven measures and ensure that everything we do as a company is instrumented, and that this instrumentation is then being actually used to improve our operational efficiency or guide the product strategy. So an example would be, for instance, we have this great phenomena of COVID and everyone's working from home, but the more important thing is that it really impacts the practice of clinical medicine right now and how cancer care is practiced. So the data scientists at our team are at the forefront of being able to quickly look at the data and sort of inform both on the provider side, what is the impact to the data? Do we see new patients visits dropping? What is happening out there? As well as on the research side, what is the impact on our data sets and what does that mean for the insights that we are drawing from this data? So I like to think of the team as sort of almost like a full stack data science team, where we are working on every aspect of product development. And I think that makes it so it's less it's much more important to be a generalist at Flatiron in data science than a specialist.
That's amazing to hear how you guys have put so much time and effort into maintaining an employee-friendly environment, particularly focused on data science. So I know there'll be people listening now very interested in the opportunities with you guys. You've also had success in attracting people from the most high-profile of organizations, and who join equally for the technology. The problem solving, the unique challenges, but also the impact to the industry. As you've worked in media for a long time and you've now transitioned into healthcare and leading a team in one of the most well-known healthcare data organizations in the world operating in this space, what have you enjoyed most about your transition from media into healthcare technology?
I actually really did enjoy media as well, and I don't see them as all that different. I think much of my role in media was trying to bring sort of a scientific point of view, right, which was very like data science oriented, to a different set of perspectives. And the different set of perspectives we were informing there were not necessarily scientific, but journalism is like, a field in its own right. And the way that a journalist thinks and approaches a problem or thinks about their work is very different from the way that a computer scientist would think of that problem. And I think of Flatiron as just that, but in a much more complex fashion, because at Flatiron, what we're trying to do is, bring together sort of three different fields or disciplines of science. So there's computer science, statistics, and medicine, right? And innovation, I think, always happens when you're at the intersection of these areas. And that's where the best ideas are, and that's where the best people are. So that's something that I really, really enjoy about Flatiron. And it's also, I think, something that's most exciting for us is the fact that we can draw these people from just these, they are experts and truly the best in each of these three fields. And then the magic happens when they come together and try to build a product together.
I think that's a great summary. I'd love to finish on what's next for Flatiron, particularly within the data team and the growth. You and I met pre-COVID, and we were talking about some of the exciting projects and the aggressive growth plans that are still very much the focus. But COVID coming up, it posed some unique challenges with the whole workforce going fully remote. Once we come through the current challenges that COVID has faced us with, what are the next 24 months going to look like for Flatiron? And in particularly within your data team, how do you see it evolving and growing as you guys continue to scale?
So I think broadly at Flatiron, we are still very much at the beginning of our journey, right? And if you think about the broader mission and mandate of the organization, which is we want to accelerate research in cancer by learning from the lives of every cancer patient. If I take that broad mission, I think we are still very much at the beginning. We've scratched the surface of that sort of journey. We've done a lot in terms of building out these data sets, bringing some of these insights. We are working more and more closely with the FDA on multiple projects. But I think that the end goal for us would be to make real world evidence really a part of the way that the day-to-day clinical evidence is generated effectively. And there's just a lot of power if we could make this kind of data insights the norm in clinical evidence generation. So when I think of there's just like a plethora of different applications where we could continue to have an impact. Some of those would be, for instance, being able to better monitor once a drug is approved, how do you sort of keep monitoring the efficacy and the safety of that drug, right? Like there's lots of drugs that have toxicity. So you could imagine us building a really cool sort of almost near real-time monitoring system where you could see that a certain drug is having a certain adverse effect in some kind of patient population. There's a lot of rare diseases and rare populations that are underserved and within the clinical trial paradigm. And I think that there's an opportunity to use this data to get better, get them better access to medicines. And then finally, I would say that the world of, if you think of cancer treatments, we are increasingly recognizing how much therapies are not actually tissue specific, but they are actually genomically driven. So we are recognizing the power of genomics in cancer. And we are increasingly moving towards this era of personalized therapies. So where we're going to combine genomic data with clinical data. So as I look towards the next 24 months, I think there's multiple different directions we could go in. At this point, we are exploring where to place our bets. I think personalized therapy is definitely a big one. There's a lot of focus on scaling up the quality of our data sets so that we are comfortable to use it in the regulatory context, which is something that my team is going to be focused on, especially in the next year. So I'm pretty excited for the future.
So am I, and so is everyone else listening to this. Geetu, we're looking forward to seeing what you guys can accomplish, and we can't wait to hear how it's going. We'll certainly follow up very soon. So thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.